January 27, 1944. The skies over central Italy. A single Italian fighter pilot climbs through thin, freezing air at 22,000 feet. Below him, snow-covered mountains cast long shadows in the winter sun. His aircraft, the Macchi C.205 Veltro, Italy's finest fighter, responds crisply to every control input. The German-built Daimler-Benz engine hums with mechanical precision, its 12 cylinders generating over 1,100 horsepower. Captain Mario Bellagambi has every reason to be confident. In 6 months of combat, he has seen his aircraft outmaneuver American P-40 Warhawks and outclimb P-38 Lightnings. The Veltro, Italian for Greyhound, is fast, agile, and deadly. It represents the pinnacle of Italian fighter design. Ground controllers have directed him toward an American bomber formation, but as he scans the horizon, he sees something unexpected. Not bombers, but fighters. 8 of them, flying in loose pairs at 25,000 feet. Their silhouettes are unfamiliar. Sleek aircraft with distinctive belly scoops and bubble canopies. These aren't P-40s. They aren't P-38s. They aren't Spitfires. Bellagambi reports the contact. The response crackles through his headset. Unidentified type. Proceed with caution. Do not engage unless fired upon. But his tactical instincts tell him something headquarters cannot know. These fighters are positioned perfectly to escort incoming bombers. If he allows them to maintain their altitude advantage, his squadron will be fighting uphill when the real work begins. He makes his decision. He will climb to investigate. His hand moves forward on the throttle, pushing it to war emergency power. The Daimler-Benz responds immediately, its supercharger whining as boost pressure climbs. The Veltro accelerates, nose rising as he trades speed for altitude. His climb rate is excellent, nearly 3,000 feet per minute. The American fighters maintain their patrol pattern, seemingly unconcerned with his approach. Bellagambi checks his instruments. Fuel adequate for 20 more minutes of combat maneuvering. Armament armed to heavy machine guns in the nose, to 20mm cannons in the wings. He's ready for whatever these Americans can offer. He has no idea that within the next 3 minutes, everything he believes about air combat superiority is about to be proven catastrophically wrong. The Macchi C.205 Veltro was no accident of design. It represented the culmination of a specific evolutionary path in Italian fighter development. The story begins in the late 1930s, when Italian military leaders recognized their aircraft were falling behind international standards. The previous Macchi design, the C.205, had proven adequate in early war years. Its construction was robust, its handling characteristics excellent, but it was underpowered, mounting only an Italian-designed radial engine, producing 870 horsepower. Against British Hurricanes and American P-40s arriving in North Africa, the Saeta's modest performance became a liability. Italian engineers understood the problem clearly. The nation's indigenous engine industry could not produce power plants comparable to the British Rolls-Royce Merlin or the American Allison. Italy's industrial capacity, strained by years of conflict in Ethiopia, Spain, and across the Mediterranean, lacked the metallurgical expertise and precision manufacturing capability that Allied nations possessed. The solution was pragmatic, license-built German engines. Specifically, the Daimler-Benz DB605, a 12-cylinder, inverted liquid-cooled engine that powered Germany's Messerschmitt Bf 109G. In 1941, Aeronautica Macchi received authorization to develop a new fighter around this engine. Chief designer Mario Costoldi understood that simply installing a more powerful engine onto an existing airframe would create problems. The DB605 produced nearly 50% more power than the previous engine used in the C.202. That additional power meant more torque, more weight on the nose, and greater cooling requirements. Costoldi's team lengthened the fuselage slightly to accommodate the larger engine. They redesigned the cowling to optimize airflow through the radiators. They strengthened the airframe to handle increased stresses. And critically, they upgraded the armament. where the previous model had carried inadequate weaponry. The C.205 would mount to heavy machine guns in the nose and to 20mm cannons in the wings. The first prototype flew on April 19, 1942. Test pilots reported exceptional handling qualities. The Veltro was responsive, stable at high speeds, and capable of sustained high-gravity maneuvers without structural failure. Maximum speed reached 399 miles per hour, with 23,600 feet, competitive with the best Allied fighters then in service. Rate of climb was 3,000 feet per minute at sea level. Service ceiling reached 37,000 feet. Production began slowly. Italian factories, operating under Allied bombing and chronic material shortages, could not produce aircraft at the rates German or American plants achieved. By September 1943, when Italy signed the armistice with the Allies, only 66 aircraft had been delivered to operational squadrons. After the armistice, production continued in German-occupied northern Italy, but total production ever exceeded approximately 262 aircraft through the war's end. This scarcity meant that most Italian squadrons continued flying older, less capable aircraft. The C.205 equipped only elite units with experienced pilots who could maximize its potential. Those pilots who did fly the Veltro loved it. Lieutenant Franco Lucchini, an ace with 26 confirmed victories, called it the best Italian fighter of the war, superior in many respects to Allied types encountered. Captain Luigi Guerini, who would finish the war with 19 victories, including 14 four-engine bombers, reported that the C.205 could match or exceed the performance of Spitfire Mark Vs and American P-40s in virtually every category, except perhaps maximum speed at very low altitudes. The confidence Italian pilots felt in their Macchis was grounded in actual combat experience, not propaganda. Throughout late 1942 and into 1943, C.205 units accumulated impressive victory claims, defending Italian airspace and supporting operations in North Africa and Sicily. On June 11, 1943, over Pantelleria, C.205s engaged American P-40 Warhawks escorting bombers. The Macchis destroyed 3 P-40s without loss. Their superior high-altitude performance allowed them to dictate engagement terms. On July 5, 1943, during the Allied invasion of Sicily, C.205 South engaged P-38 Lightnings in a swirling dogfight over Augusta. The Lightnings found themselves surprised by the Macchi's climbing ability and turning performance. Two P-38s went down, their pilots bailing out over the Mediterranean. The Italian pilots landed, reported their victories, and flew again that afternoon. These successes reinforced Italian tactical doctrine, which emphasized individual pilot skill, aircraft maneuverability, and aggressive engagement at close range. Italian fighter pilots were trained to dogfight to enter turning engagements, where superior handling could overcome raw performance. The C.205's light wing loading and harmonious controls made it an excellent dogfighter. At speeds below 300 miles per hour, the Veltro could outrun most Allied fighters, particularly the heavier P-38 and P-47 Thunderbolt. Italian doctrine also emphasized altitude advantage when possible, diving attacks when altitude permitted, and disengagement by diving when outmatched. But fundamentally, Italian pilots expected to fight in visual range, in maneuvering combat where pilot skill mattered more than sheer speed or climb rate. This doctrine worked against the aircraft they encountered in 1942 and early 1943. It would prove inadequate against what was coming. What Italian pilots did not fully appreciate in early 1944 was how rapidly American aircraft design had progressed. The P-40s and early P-38s they had fought were first-generation American fighters designed in the late 1930s and rushed into production when war broke out. These aircraft were adequate, but not exceptional. They represented what American industry could produce quickly. not what American engineers could design given time and resources. By 1944, a new generation of American fighters was arriving in the Mediterranean theater. The P-47 Thunderbolts, massive and heavily armed, could dive faster than anything in the sky and deliver devastating firepower. The P-38 Lightning had evolved through multiple variants, each addressing shortcomings revealed in combat. And then there was the North American P-51 Mustang, an aircraft that would fundamentally change air combat over Europe and the Mediterranean. Italian intelligence reports noted the arrival of these new types, but assessments varied. Some analysts correctly identified the P-51 as a serious threat, noting its reported performance specifications suggested it matched or exceeded the best Axis fighters. Others dismissed it as propaganda, arguing that no single-engine fighter could achieve the combination of speed, range, altitude performance, and firepower the Americans claimed. After all, physics imposed limits. An aircraft optimized for speed usually sacrificed maneuverability. High-altitude performance came at the cost of low-altitude capability. Long range meant carrying more fuel, which increased weight and reduced performance. The P-51, according to Italian calculations, should have compromised somewhere. It didn't, and that impossible combination of capabilities would become devastatingly clear to pilots like Captain Mario Bellagambi within moments of their first encounter. The North American P-51 Mustang existed because of a failure and a deadline. In April 1940, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation with a contract to build Curtiss P-40 Warhawks under license for the Royal Air Force. Britain needed fighters desperately. The Battle of France was weeks away from catastrophic collapse, and the impending Battle of Britain would demand every aircraft the RAF could muster. North American Aviation's president, James Kindleberger, made a counter-proposal. His company could design and build a completely new, superior fighter in the same time frame it would take to establish P-40 production. The British were skeptical but intrigued. They gave North American 120 days to produce a prototype. Chief designer Edgar Schmude and his team began work immediately, drawing on wind tunnel data from earlier projects and incorporating lessons learned from early air combat reports filtering back from Europe. They designed the aircraft around the American Allison engine, the same power plant used in the P-40, but with a critical difference in airframe philosophy. Where the P-40 had been designed for ruggedness and ease of production, the Mustang would be designed for aerodynamic efficiency. Schmude's team created a laminar flow wing, a revolutionary design where the airfoil shape maintained smooth airflow over a greater percentage of the wing surface. Reducing drag significantly, they positioned the radiator in a ventral scoop beneath the fuselage, using heated air exiting the radiator to provide a small amount of thrust, partially offsetting the cooling system's drag. They designed a low-drag fuselage with minimal frontal area and smooth contours. Every square inch of the aircraft was optimized for speed. The prototype flew on October 26, 1940. It was faster than the P-40, faster than the Hurricane, faster than early Spitfire variants. But it had a critical flaw. The Allison engine, while powerful at low altitudes, lost performance dramatically above 15,000 feet because it lacked an effective high-altitude supercharger at 20,000 feet and above, where German fighters operated and where bombers needed escort. The early Mustang was mediocre. The Royal Air Force accepted the aircraft anyway, deploying it in tactical reconnaissance and ground attack roles where its low-altitude speed and range proved valuable. The American Army Air Forces also ordered the type, but similarly restricted it to low-altitude missions. For 2 years, the Mustang remained a capable but not exceptional fighter, its potential limited by its power plant. The transformation came in 1942 when Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker flew an early Mustang and immediately recognized that the airframe's aerodynamic efficiency would be perfectly matched to the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same power plant that made the Spitfire formidable at high altitude. The Merlin's two-stage supercharger maintained power output at altitudes where the Allison faded. Rolls-Royce installed a Merlin in a Mustang airframe. The results were extraordinary. Maximum speed increased from 390 miles per hour with the Allison to 441 miles per hour at 24,800 feet with the Merlin. Service ceiling increased from 31,350 feet to 41,900 feet. Rate of climb improved from 2,200 feet per minute to 3,475 feet per minute. The Mustang had been good. With the Merlin, it became exceptional. North American Aviation received contracts to produce the Merlin-powered variant using the Packard engine, a license-built version manufactured in the United States. Production began in 1943. By December 1943, Mustangs were arriving in England to equip 8th Air Force fighter groups. By January 1944, they were arriving in Italy to equip 15th Air Force units. The specifications were impressive on paper. Empty weight, 6,840 pounds. Loaded weight, 9,200 pounds. Maximum takeoff weight with external fuel tanks, 12,100 pounds. Wingspan, 37 feet. Length, 32 feet 3 inches. Power plant, 1 Packard Merlin. A 12-cylinder liquid-cooled engine producing 1,490 horsepower at 24,000 feet with war emergency power. Armament, 4 heavy machine guns, 2 in each wing, with substantial ammunition capacity. Maximum speed, 441 miles per hour at 24,800 feet. Cruise speed, 362 miles per hour. Service ceiling, 41,900 feet. Combat range with internal fuel, approximately 750 miles, with 2 external drop tanks, 1,300 miles, but specifications on paper meant nothing to pilots who had never encountered the aircraft in combat. Italian pilots reading intelligence reports saw numbers that seemed impossible. No fighter could be that fast, climb that well, and fly that far while carrying that much armament. The numbers had to be propaganda American exaggeration, designed to intimidate Axis pilots. Real combat would reveal the truth. Captain Mario Bellagambi continued his climb toward the unknown American fighters. His Macchi C.205 Veltro responded crisply to control inputs as he gained altitude. At 24,000 feet, he leveled off, maintaining enough speed to maneuver if the Americans turned aggressive. His wingman, Lieutenant Alessandro Ruffini, held position 300 meters to his left and slightly behind the standard Italian tactical formation that allowed mutual support, while maintaining enough separation to avoid collision during violent maneuvering. The American formation was now clearly visible against the pale blue winter sky. Bellagambi counted 8 aircraft in 4 pairs, flying in a loose finger 4 pattern that suggested they had adopted German tactical doctrine rather than the rigid formations American fighters had used earlier in the war. This was his first indicator that these pilots were experienced, probably veterans of air battles over Germany, where survival demanded tactical flexibility. The aircraft themselves were beautiful in a functional sense, sleek, purposeful, with none of the angular brutality of the P-38 or the blunt robustness of the P-40. The bubble canopy suggested excellent visibility, a significant advantage in air combat where most kills came from unseen attackers. The ventral scoop was distinctive, positioned aft of the wings in a location Bellagambi recognized would create minimal interference with airflow over the fuselage. Whoever had designed this aircraft understood aerodynamics. Bellagambi's tactical mind processed options. He was slightly below the Americans, perhaps 500 feet lower, that they had noticed his approach and gained some altitude. His fuel state was adequate. 15 minutes of combat maneuvering remained before he would need to consider breaking off. His armament was fully loaded. His engine temperatures were normal. He was ready. The Americans turned toward him, not aggressively, not diving to attack, but a gentle turn that positioned their noses in his general direction while maintaining altitude. This was curious. Most American fighters, when they spotted Axis aircraft below them, immediately dove to attack, using their altitude advantage to build speed and energy. These pilots were doing something different. They were maintaining their altitude, content to watch and wait. Bellagambi keyed his radio. He instructed his wingman to maintain position, while he made a high-speed pass to assess the Americans' reaction. "Do not engage unless they attack," his wingman acknowledged. Bellagambi pushed his throttle forward, feeling the engine respond with a surge of power. He pulled the nose up slightly, trading some speed for altitude, climbing toward the American formation at a shallow angle. His indicated airspeed was 320 miles per hour, fast enough to disengage if necessary, slow enough to maneuver if they turned to fight. The Americans maintained their position, neither advancing nor retreating. Bellagambi closed the range to 1,000 meters, then 800, then 600. At 500 meters, he executed a climbing roller maneuver designed to display his aircraft's agility, while simultaneously checking his 6 o'clock position fall threats. The Veltro responded beautifully, rolling crisply around its longitudinal axis while maintaining its climb. When he rolled wings level, he was perhaps 300 meters from the nearest American fighter, close enough to see details. The American pilot sat behind that distinctive bubble canopy, his head turning to track Bellagambi's Macchi. The fighter's nose art was visible, a name painted in script letters below the cockpit, though Bellagambi couldn't read the English words at this distance. Then the American did something Bellagambi didn't expect. He rocked his wings, a gesture universally understood among fighter pilots. Acknowledgement, possibly even a salute between professionals. For a moment, there was no war, no nations, no ideology. Just two men in powerful machines, acknowledging each other's presence in the sky. Bellagambi rocked his wings in response. Then, he turned away, diving slightly to build speed, planning to circle back to his wingman's position and continue the patrol. The American followed, not aggressively, not diving to attack, but simply following Bellagambi's turn with a lazy, almost casual pursuit curve. Bellagambi completed his turn, rolled wings level, and looked back over his shoulder. The American was still there, perhaps 600 meters behind, matching his heading. Bellagambi pushed his throttle to the stop, commanding maximum continuous power. The engine responded, propeller pitch automatically adjusting to maintain optimal revolutions. His airspeed increased, 340 miles per hour, 360. He checked over his shoulder again. The American was still there, same distance, seemingly unconcerned with Bellagambi's acceleration. This made no sense. Bellagambi was flying at near maximum speed for the Veltro at this altitude. The American should be falling behind unless he was also at maximum power, which seemed wasteful for what was essentially a tail chase with no immediate threat. Bellagambi decided to test the American's capabilities more directly. He pulled the nose up sharply, executing a chandelle at the climbing turn that combined altitude gain with direction change, a maneuver that demonstrated both engine power and pilot skill. The Veltro responded perfectly, climbing through 500 feet while turning 90 degrees, bleeding speed as it converted kinetic energy to potential energy. At the top of the chandelle, he rolled level, expecting to find the American far behind, struggling to match the climb. The American was there, not falling behind, not struggling, but positioned exactly where a competent pilot would be, slightly higher to the side, maintaining energy while keeping Bellagambi in sight. The American had matched his chandelle, possibly even exceeded his climb rate, and done so while maintaining tactical position. For the first time, Bellagambi felt a touch of concern. This was not normal. This was not the performance he expected from any American fighter he had encountered. He keyed his radio again, informing his wingman that these aircraft were not P-40s or P-38s. Unknown performance characteristics. He recommended they disengage and report. But even as he spoke, part of him rejected the idea of running from a single American who had made no hostile move. He was an Italian fighter pilot, flying the best aircraft his nation could produce. He wouldn't retreat without understanding what he faced. He would soon wish he had. Bellagambi made his decision. He would force the American into a turning fight where the Veltro's superior maneuverability would give him the advantage. He pulled the stick hard into his lap and right, initiating a maximum performance turn at full power. The gravity forces pressed him into his seat. 3 gravities, 4. The Veltro's controls remained responsive even at the edge of its performance envelope. He rolled through 180 degrees, then rolled level, expecting to find the American overshooting or struggling to match his turn rate. The American was gone, not behind him where he expected, but ahead somehow, having gained position during the maneuver. This was impossible. Bellagambi's tactical sense screamed warning. He had just executed a near-perfect defensive turn, a maneuver that should have denied any attacker a firing solution. Instead, the American had somehow used the same moment to gain advantage. Then Bellagambi understood. The American hadn't tried to match his turn. The American had simply pulled up, using his superior power to weight ratio and energy state to climb above, while Bellagambi's turn bled speed and energy. It was a fundamental principle of energy tactics. Don't follow your opponent into his best regime. Instead, use your advantages to force him into yours. The American pilot understood this perfectly. Bellagambi pushed his throttle through the gate into emergency power. The engine responded with maximum boost pressure from its supercharger. He needed to regain altitude and energy before the American could capitalize on his position. His airspeed had dropped to 240 miles per hour during the turn, dangerously slow. The American decided to attack. He pointed the nose down slightly, trading altitude for speed, building his energy state back to something manageable. The American remained above, not attacking, seemingly content to maintain position. Bellagambi climbed again, less aggressively this time, building speed while gaining altitude. 300 miles per hour, 320, 340. His altitude was back to 24,000 feet. Same as before the engagement began. The American was at 26,000 feet, 2,000 feet above, positioned perfectly for a diving attack. Bellagambi made a critical decision. He would show this American what the Veltro could do in a pure speed run. He rolled level, pointed the nose at the horizon, and pushed the throttle hard against the stop, confirming emergency power. The engine screamed, producing 1,275 horsepower at this altitude, driving the propeller at 2,800 revolutions per minute. The Veltro accelerated, 360 miles per hour, 380, 390 at 395 miles per hour indicated airspeed. The Veltro was approaching its maximum velocity at this altitude. Bellagambi was flying as fast as his aircraft could fly in level flight at 24,000 feet. He held this speed, watching his fuel gauge drop as the engine consumed fuel at war emergency power settings. He could maintain this for perhaps 5 minutes before he would need to reduce power to avoid engine damage from overheating. He checked his mirror's simple glass reflectors mounted above his canopy that gave him a limited view of his 6 o'clock position. The American was there, perhaps 1 kilometer behind, still following. Bellagambi felt a surge of satisfaction. At this speed, the American couldn't close the distance. Whatever this new fighter was, it apparently could not exceed the Veltro's maximum speed. They were evenly matched. Then the American accelerated, not slowly, not gradually, but with a purposeful surge that closed the range from 1 kilometer to 800 meters, then to 600 meters. Bellagambi's satisfaction evaporated, replaced by shock. He was flying at maximum continuous speed. The American was overtaking him. This was not possible. Every fighter had a maximum speed determined by engine power, drag, and aerodynamic design. The Veltro was at its maximum. The American should be at its maximum. They should be keeping the same distance. Bellagambi pushed harder on the throttle. though it was already at the stop. There was no more power to give. The American continued closing. 500 meters, 400, 300. Bellagambi could see him clearly now, that bubble canopy, the predatory lines of the nose with its machine guns, their muzzles like dark circles watching him. The American wasn't just faster, he was significantly faster, perhaps 40 or 50 miles per hour faster at this altitude. The mathematics and physics became horribly clear. If the American could fly 50 miles per hour faster in level flight, he could dictate every engagement. He could chase down any Italian fighter attempting to disengage. He could maintain pursuit indefinitely. And if he could do this in level flight, his diving speed would be even more impressive. There would be no escape, no tactical option that didn't depend on the American pilot's choice to let him go. Bellagambi broke hard left, desperate to force an overshoot, to create separation, to do anything that might deny the American this perfect pursuit position. The Veltro responded instantly, rolling into a 7-gravity turn that grayed Bellagambi's vision at the edges. He held the turn, bleeding speed rapidly as the turn radius tightened. 280 miles per hour, 260, 240. He rolled level, looking for the American. The American was exactly where any competent pilot would be, offset to the side, maintaining energy, watching Bellagambi struggle. And then, almost casually, the American turned away, climbing back toward his formation, which had maintained altitude throughout this entire encounter. The message was clear: we can beat you anytime we choose. Today, we're letting you go. Bellagambi rejoined his wingman. Both pilots turned for home without a word over the radio. The fuel gauge showed 7 minutes until they would reach minimum fuel to return to base with reserves. They flew in silence, each man processing what they had witnessed. Below them, the Italian countryside, past villages and roads and farms that had been Italian since before Rome was an empire. Land that generations had defended, land that now seemed suddenly vulnerable because the aircraft defending it were inadequate. When Bellagambi landed and shut down his engine, he sat in the cockpit for a long moment before climbing out. His ground crew approached, reading his expression. "Captain, what happened? Did you engage?" Bellagambi removed his flying helmet, feeling the cold air against his sweat-damp hair. "We encountered the American's new fighter. It's faster than anything we have, significantly faster, and it climbs better, and it has the range to escort bombers all the way to Germany if they choose." His crew chief, a veteran mechanic who had maintained fighters since Ethiopia, looked stricken. "What can we do?" Bellagambi walked away from his aircraft toward the operations tent where he would file his report. He didn't answer the question because there was no answer. What could they do? They could fly and fight with what they had, knowing it was inadequate, hoping that skill and courage could compensate for material inferiority. They could do their duty, but they could not change the mathematics of engine power, aerodynamic efficiency, and industrial capacity. In his report, Bellagambi wrote, "Encountered 8 unknown type American fighters, believed to be new P-51 Mustang variant. Aircraft demonstrated speed in excess of 440 miles per hour at 24,000 feet, significantly exceeding Macchi C.205 maximum velocity. Climb rate and acceleration superior to C.205 tested in all regimes. Armament appeared to be heavy machine guns, wing-mounted. Pilot demonstrated excellent tactical awareness and energy management. Assessment: this aircraft type represents serious threat to all Italian fighter operations. Recommend immediate tactical doctrine review." The report went up the chain of command. One more piece of bad news in a war that was producing nothing but bad news. Italian fighters had become obsolete. Italian pilots had known this since Sicily, since the Americans arrived with their overwhelming numbers and their casual abundance of fuel and ammunition. But knowing it in general terms and experiencing it personally were different things. Bellagambi had just learned that even his beloved Veltro, the finest fighter Italy had produced, was outmatched by American engineering and industry. The revelation would spread through Italian fighter squadrons as other pilots encountered the P-51 and returned with similar reports. They had always been going to lose, but now they knew it with absolute certainty. Word of the P-51 Mustang's capabilities spread through Italian fighter squadrons with the speed of bad news in wartime. Pilots who had encountered the new American fighter shared their experiences in ready rooms and dispersal areas. Their descriptions met with skepticism from those who had not yet faced the threat themselves. But skepticism dissolved quickly as more encounters occurred throughout February and March of 1944. Every pilot who tangled with the Mustang returned with the same assessment. It was faster, climbed better, turned adequately despite its speed advantage, and possessed the range to escort bombers anywhere over Italian or German airspace. The psychological impact was devastating. Italian fighter pilots had endured 2 years of progressive defeat, watching their nation's fortunes decline from the optimistic offensives of 1942 to the desperate defensive battles of 1944. They had adapted to fighting outnumbered, learning to maximize their aircraft's strengths while avoiding American numerical superiority. They had accepted fuel shortages, ammunition shortages, replacement aircraft shortages, and the constant attrition of experienced pilots lost faster than training could replace them. But they had retained belief in one core principle: in single combat between equally skilled pilots. Their Macchi C.205 could compete with Allied fighters. The P-51 shattered that belief. There was no tactical doctrine, no amount of skill, no advantageous positioning that could overcome a 50-mile-per-hour speed differential combined with superior climb rate and comparable maneuverability. Italian pilots found themselves in situations that had no solution. If they engaged, the Americans could dictate terms. If they disengaged, the Americans could pursue. If they stayed high, the Mustangs could climb to meet them. If they stayed low, the Mustangs could dive and maintain the speed advantage. Captain Mario Bellagambi flew 11 more combat missions after his first encounter with the P-51. He engaged American fighters 3 more times, always attempting to use altitude and surprise to negate the Mustang's performance advantages. On March 14, 1944, while intercepting a formation of bombers, his flight of 4 Macchi fighters was bounced by 6 P-51s. The Americans dove from 28,000 feet, building speed to over 450 miles per hour before opening fire. Bellagambi saw them coming. The warning came from his wingman, who had better position to scan the sun sector, but seeing them and evading them were different problems. He broke hard right, pulling maximum gravity forces, his vision tunneling as blood drained from his head. The P-51s split their formation, 2 following his break, 4 engaging the rest of his flight. Bellagambi's defensive turn bought him seconds, but the Americans didn't try to match his turn radius. They climbed, maintained their energy, and waited for him to straighten out or run out of airspeed. When Bellagambi rolled level at 230 miles per hour dangerously slow and vulnerable, the P-51s were positioned perfectly above and behind him. He saw the muzzle flashes, machine guns firing in sequence, their rounds creating a cone of fire that walked toward his aircraft. He pushed his nose down desperately, trading his remaining altitude for speed, diving toward the ground where perhaps the terrain would limit the Americans' maneuvering options. The P-51s followed, easily matching his dive, their streamlined fuselages and efficient cooling systems allowing them to maintain structural integrity at speeds that would have torn apart earlier American fighters. Bellagambi pulled out of the dive at 8,000 feet, his airspeed reading 410 miles per hour faster than he had ever flown the Veltro. His aircraft shuddered with the stress, control surfaces vibrating. He leveled off, scanning frantically for the Americans. They were gone. Not behind him, not above him, simply gone. Bellagambi circled cautiously, checking his 6 o'clock repeatedly, expecting the attack that never came. After 2 minutes, an eternity in air combat, he spotted the P-51s climbing back toward the bomber stream, resuming their escort duties. they had broken off the pursuit, not because they couldn't maintain it, but because escorting the bombers was more important than confirming the kill on a single Italian fighter. Bellagambi returned to base alone. His 3 wingmen were missing. One had been shot down and killed, his Macchi disintegrating under sustained machine gun fire. One had bailed out successfully and would return to the squadron 3 days later after evading German troops in the area. One had been forced to crash land with engine damage from a single burst that had penetrated his cooling system. Of 4 aircraft that had engaged, 3 were lost for a mission that accomplished nothing. The bombers had hit their target. The P-51s had defended them successfully. Italian fighters had been swept aside as if they were barely relevant to the outcome. This pattern repeated across Italian airspace. Throughout spring 1940-4. The Italian Air Force lost experienced pilots at an unsustainable rate. Training programs could not replace combat veterans quickly enough. Fuel allocations decreased monthly as Allied bombing destroyed refineries and interdiction missions cut transportation routes. Replacement aircraft arrived irregularly, often diverted to Germany, where the Luftwaffe faced its own existential crisis defending the Reich against American daylight bombing and British night raids. Italian fighter pilots increasingly found themselves relegated to secondary missions, attacking Allied ground forces when fighter escort was minimal, defending against night bombers where the Mustang's speed mattered less, flying reconnaissance missions where avoiding combat was the objective, the offensive missions that had characterized Italian fighter operations in 1942 and early 1943 became memories. By summer 1944, simply surviving a mission was considered success. Captain Bellagambi flew his last combat mission on July 23, 1944. The mission tasking was defensive patrol over Milan, protecting industrial facilities from American fighter bomber attacks. Encountered no American aircraft during the patrol,